I mean, my auntie's next door neighbour was killing a chicken in her garden, for God's sake. I mean, chickens came from Sainsbury's, you know. You think, kill your own chickens? What kind of people are they? I think my perception of normality had completely got out the window. I thought, oh, now they're just shooting at each other. That's what happens out here.
Hey guys, today we're going to be listening to the fascinating story of Helena Sage, a London-born Cypriot who is taken out of her natural habitat and forced to adjust to the village-like ways of Cyprus. In her first 10 years of life, Helena fought to find her place in British culture, learning the language and in many ways becoming a parental figure to her younger siblings in a household where her parents hardly knew any English and worked extremely long hours. But in a strike of a match, the family uprooted from their West London home and moved to Cyprus. In a country where Gazangides was their version of T-Rex, Helena had to find a way to readjust, only to find that her biggest struggle was yet to come, finding herself in the midst of the Turkish invasion of Cyprus. At a time when Greek and Turkish tensions are resurfacing, Helena's story is perhaps more relevant than ever. Initially documenting her story in a series of articles for the Cyprus Mail, we have Helena on my YouTube channel today to tell us her story. This interview is a two-part series, so if you would like to get an update on the second part, then be sure to subscribe to my channel. The level to which you had to adjust, like you started off completely Greek, not knowing any English, then you went to the UK, had to adjust, and then you had to adjust again. What was that like in the early years for you?
So my earliest memory, I've got this really vivid memory, I think I put it in one of my stories, is we ended up living in a basement flat in Shepherd's Bush, and it was just a basement with an outside loo. It was 1964, and we had no bathroom. We had no bath. So my mum would walk us from, I don't know if you know Shepherd's Bush, from the Goldhawk Road all the way up to where the old BBC used to be, which was White City. So we used to walk all the way. There were communal baths there. And I remember walking there with my mum, and then we'd have a really hot bath. And I don't know, the winters in London were a lot colder then. And then after having a hot bath, then we'd get dressed and we'd have to walk all the way home again. And I'd actually remember my teeth chattering, my teeth just like, and to this day, I cannot bear the cold. Even in summer, you know, I will wear a cardigan or something. And I'm sure I was traumatized by the cold, you know, just having a bath and then having to walk home in the cold. But then the other adjustment I really remember quite vividly is going to school and not being able to speak English. The only English I picked up was from the TV. Of course, it was a real disadvantage. And I remember my dad being called up to, his English wasn't much better than mine, to be honest, but he got called up to the school and told that, you know, he had to do something and speak English at home to get me sort of a little bit more specced up with the other children. And I just remember my dad giving the headmaster a lecture in Pidgin English about he comes from the land of, you know, Socrates and Homer, and that she, you know, she's a stupid woman and it's her job to teach me English, and just more humiliation really. And the first thing that everybody told me about my parents, even before I kind of realised, was how attractive they were. I came from some really good looking people, and my dad played football for Mono Nicosia. He was very naughty. He was just a naughty boy. He was a womanizer. Oh God, he smoked like a chimney. Oh my God, every photograph I have of my father, there was a cigarette in his hand. And even when I used to go and watch him play football, at half time he would have a cigarette. But he was never a gambler, you know, and he, you know, that's one thing my dad never did. And despite the fact that he loved football and God only granted him 4 daughters, which for a Greek man, you know, it's like he was cursed. So he got married very young. Him and my mum ran away together, which caused a scandal. But he did quite well, which was, you know, he had a house built in Nicosia and 2 children. So the fact that he came to London, most of the Cypriots in London are from either Larnaca or the north of Kyrenia up there. My dad was from Nicosia. He was actually quite well off compared to a lot of people. So I really do not know. Nobody to this, even he can't tell me to this day why he came to London. And then one day when I really pressed him on it, I said, again, why, Dad? Well, you had a house, you had a good job. And he goes, Beribedius, which in English means adventures. He was looking for adventures. Now, why he was looking for adventures with a wife and 2 children, God knows. But once he came here, he hated every day he was here. Hated it. Never adjusted. Always had 1 foot in Cyprus and 1 foot here. But by the time he realised that he hated it, because he came here on his own without my mother, and he sent a message to my mum saying, don't bother coming, we're not staying. My mum had sold everything and packed it all off on a boat from Limassol. So she said, look, I'm coming. Even if we do a couple of years, I'm coming. Well, those couple of years turned into over a decade, But he kept losing his job. He kept fighting at work. He kept getting fired. He kept punching people, swearing at them, getting fired. He never kept down a job. He just didn't. And which made life quite difficult. So we moved from Shepherd's Bush to... Now, that's another weird thing. All the Greeks in London live in North London. My parents went west, like west of Wembley, so to Harrow. So we had very few Greeks living around us, which meant my dad kept us more and more isolated because he didn't want us to sort of mix very much, which is something that I found quite... I was jealous of when I was listening to your mum, because she didn't seem to be so restricted as I was, because we had no Greeks in my school. I was the only one, really. A few came eventually, but yes, my dad just kept all 4 of his daughters really controlled and contained, and we didn't ask to go out, we didn't ask to have friends around, we didn't ask, it was just no, and we give us the glare.
You talk a lot about your parents being miserable in the UK, but you also talk about how embarrassed you were of them and how you lived a double life.
Well, my parents were I would say they were semi-literate as well, and I was really quite bright. This is embarrassing. My sister calls me a nerd, but at age 12, I read War and Peace, which isn't natural, I know, but I did. So I really liked Shakespeare and I liked literature, And my dad was just he barely could sign his name. So in the end, I was signing all my school forms, I would just sign them. And he had a very village attitude that, women just got married. They didn't need an education. So I was just getting more and more vexed by him. He would never come to parents' evening, and when he did come, he would just embarrass me. So, for example, because he was a very attractive man. I mean, even I can see it now. Even when he's 85 and he's got all this salt and pepper thing going on, and very handsome, even for an old man. My teachers would flirt with him. It was mortifying, and I would see them tweaking their hair. And he came to parents' evening once and he was useless, more than useless. Couldn't wait to leave and go home and have a fag. And afterwards, my teachers, when it was the next parents' evening, they would come up to me and they'd go, Helena, is your father coming to parents' evening? And I thought, oh, shit, they're hitting on my dad, But, my mum spoke no English at all, nothing. And I was ill once and I needed to go to the doctors. And I said to her, Mum, my hair was falling out. And I said, Mum, I need to go to the doctor. The nurse at school said, I need to go to the doctor because of my hair. She goes, well, go. And I said, but Mum, I'm 10. And she said, well, where it is? I go, Mum, you need to come with me. She goes, but I don't understand a word he's saying. And I go, but I'm 10. You need to come to me as my adult. I will listen to the doctor. You just need to sit there. And she goes, oh, you're wasting my time. I've got things to do. I go, Mum, I'm 10. And that's how it was just really frustrating that, I can understand why they were trying to make a living. They were trying to make ends meet. They were just trying to survive. But, they were so stupid. They were just I'm a child, kind of thing. Yeah. And in the end, it got to the point where you disregarded them. You just got on with it. And then they worked very ridiculously long hours. So I would pick both my sisters up from school. My sister Alexandra, she's 4 years younger than me. And my sister Louisa, she is 8 years younger than me. So I would pick Alex and Louisa up from school. We'd walk home. We'd make ourselves something to eat. I'd make sure they did their homework. So by the time I was, 11, 12, And then when we came back from Cyprus, 14, 15, I was their mum. And my mum and dad just, I have a great relationship with them now. It's quite bizarre. And we've told them all, we've kind of sat there and told them things. And my dad just looks at us and goes, is there anything wrong with you? You're fine. Shut up.
Your parents came to the end of their straw a little bit in the UK, it sounds like, and decided that they were going to move to Cyprus. So what caused them to come to that decision? How did you find out? How did that feel?
Well, it was more my dad, because he lost his job again. Probably punched someone or called somebody a rude word or something. He was working for IBM at the time, doing night shifts, I remember. And we'd gone back to Cyprus in 71 just for a holiday. And that was the first time that they'd been back since they left. And I think that summer, that 6-week summer, made my dad even more restless, because it was the first time he'd been back since 63. And when he came back, he was just really not happy, like he'd been reminded, what he was leaving. And so he had this job with IBM and got fired, and he was working night shifts. And I remember I was about to go to school in the morning, and he walked in after the night shift, and he was talking with my mum, and he goes, "Fevgulmen, we're leaving. I've had enough. I'm not going to apply for another job. I'm not, we're selling the house, and that's it." And I thought it was just some kind of, because he used to say all the time, he was always, I'm going to leave. It was just a mantra that he did, every so often. You'd think, yeah, whatever. But this time, I came home a couple of days later, and there was a for sale sign outside the house. And my older sister, who now lives in Cyprus, she's lived there since 79. I remember saying to her, "Is he serious?" And she was 15 and I was 11. And she just said, he can't be serious. She goes, "I'm doing my O-levels." And, but it happened. I remember sitting at Heathrow Airport thinking, I cannot believe this is happening. If I could have run, I tried to run away, but then I thought, well, he's going to catch me and then I'm going to be for it, And then I thought, it's a bit cold out there as well, because I think it was October, November. And I just thought, no, this isn't going to work. I was intelligent enough to realise I wasn't going to get very far. And then I thought, well, maybe they'll go and they'll hate it and they'll come back. But I just really actually wasn't believing it was happening until we arrived there. And it was October. It was October, actually. It was just after my birthday. And it was bloody boiling. And I'm like, what? It was left autumn and it's boiling. And I was miserable, absolutely miserable. I wouldn't talk. I wouldn't. And then they promised me that they were going to put me into a private school run by nuns, and all the lessons would be in English. So I was a little bit encouraged by that, thinking, well, okay, it'll be full of international students and maybe I'll be fine. But no, they couldn't afford it. So they stuck me in a Cypriot school in Famagusta.
Now, Famagusta, I heard, was quite like a hotspot for tourism back then. Like, I heard that Elizabeth Taylor used to holiday there. Now it's kind of a ghost town, or there's a lot of it that's blocked off. So what was it like when you first got there?
Well, it was beautiful. It was absolutely beautiful. It was... All I remember, there were orange and lemon trees everywhere. The fragrance was absolutely intoxicating. There were girls in the streets selling garlands of jasmine, and they put them around your neck. It was full of ice cream parlours and coffee bars, and it was absolutely beautiful. And there was this long road that led down to the sea. And then once you got there, it was like a hill. And once you got there, it was full of these really amazing... It reminded me a little bit of the Miami Strip. I've never been to Miami, but my sister has, and she said it reminds you. It was just like nowhere that is in Cyprus now that you could imagine. It was absolutely beautiful, very cosmopolitan, very international. I was 11, and my uncle and auntie lived in the suburbs of Famagusta, even though they had a tourist shop down in the main strip, and the TV was all in Greek. There was no English channel. There was no internet. We're talking 1972 now. There's no internet. It was all. If you wanted to listen to English music, you had to get the British Forces Broadcasting Service, or some of the Israeli. Because of the Arab-Israeli war, there were boats that used to moor in the Med that used to broadcast English and play English music. It was just. I come from London and, Bay City Rollers and T-Rex and, there was a vibe in London, obviously in the 70s, to this, what I would call barren wilderness of culture, and it was just like they were playing Gazanjidis, and and they were, I mean, my auntie's next door neighbour was killing a chicken in her garden, for God's sake. I mean, chickens came from Sainsbury's, You didn't kill your own chickens. What kind of people are they? It's just... And I saw she had all these bunnies, and I'm like, oh, she's got bunnies. And then my mum goes, yeah, they're having one for dinner. And I'm like, what? What are you people? And then they would call us the ingleses, or men just like, don't show the ingleses, we're killing the chickens, they won't eat dinner tonight. And I'm like, no, of course I'm not going to eat it. I was talking to it yesterday. It was horrendous. I thought, what is this place? The novelty of the sun wore off very quickly, and then I went to school, and I mean, my Greek was good, but I couldn't read or write, so I was like a toddler, a toddler that was turning into a teenager. I was like a freak. They were all like, oh, there's this English girl come to our school, and yeah, it wasn't easy, because you're at that. I mean, my sister, who was at the time was 6, something like that, she didn't give a monkeys. She just got down and dirty, started playing the rope, with all the other little kids. And she was 6 and my other sister was 4. They didn't even, to them it was just, hey, we're playing outside. Because, Cyprus, in the street, all the kids played in the street. My sisters were out there playing. I was sitting there thinking, oh God, I'm not going out there. Because you're awkward at 11, 12, aren't you? You're just not that uninhibited as you are when you're younger. So I wasn't making friends. I wasn't assimilating. I just wasn't. And I hated everybody. I hated every grown-up in my family. My uncle, my auntie. I hated my mum. I hated my dad.
You spoke about 2 women that you found really kind, the ones that taught you how to sew or something like that.
Yeah, so we spent a few months in the main suburbs of Famagusta, and then my parents were living with my auntie and uncle who were childless, and I sensed friction. It wasn't going well, because they had 4 children in their house all of a sudden, and my sisters were quite young, 6 and 4. So then we moved to a place called Gadovarosin, which is even further out in the suburbs, and we rented a house, and it was the house that was built for the older daughter of a widow's 2 daughters, the older one. And it was their house, they built it, and she was going to inherit it when she married. But at the moment she wasn't married, so they were renting it out. And if you opened one of the windows at the side of the house, they lived in a little shack next door to the main house. So I could open the back door and run into their kitchen. And I think they felt a bit sorry for me. And I don't know if you know, in Cyprus they have these, they're called baranges. They have these tarpaulin metal ceilings, and they make them into these little kitchens, and it was just a stove really with a little lamp hanging, and very primitive but cosy. And I'd go in there and I'd escape in there, and they would teach me to cook, and they taught me how to make Greek coffee, and they taught me they would make little cakes, and they would call me out. They would knock on the door and say, Ella, Elena, come and we'll show you how to do this. And yeah, they were really kind to me. They were lovely, yeah.
Was that when you started kind of slowly coming around to enjoying Cyprus?
Yeah, and then I went to another school, and there was an English girl there who had also kind of more or less had the same experience. And she was from North London. And all the kids in the street went to the same school. So that was kind of nice, because I could get to know them in school and outside of school. They gave me an old bike, and I started cycling around the neighbourhood. And my mum, for the first time in her life, and my dad allowed us to be free, which is something they wouldn't let us do in London. So in a funny way, they used to kick us out the house during the school holiday and say, don't come back till dinner time. So we would like cycle here and cycle there and cycle to other people. And I started quite enjoying it. It wasn't, and I was doing well at school. I was learning. So I didn't feel like such a freak. And I also joined, they did Greek dancing after school, and one of the girls in the street said, come and do the, the one where you hold hands and you do all the, kind of started coming out of myself a little bit. And, I used to buy a lot of, at great expense, I used to buy a lot of English magazines, and they would go, "Oh, have you got any English magazines?" So, you know, I became a little bit popular, a little bit, just, you know, don't go. Yeah. So it was all right. For a little while, it was okay. And then my dad, you know, like the guy is just unbearable, you know. He felt he wasn't, you know, he didn't know anybody in Famagusta. He wasn't from round there. He'd made one friend, but, you know, he felt, and then some of the money had come over from London from the sale of the house, and he decided he was going to open his own business. So we moved to Nicosia. We just moved to Nicosia, just like that, you know. And that's where his cousins were, and his sister, and all his football mates. That's really where he was from. So really, we should have gone there in the first place, but.
So was he happier there, even though you felt like, oh, yeah, God, we have to move again?
To be honest with you, I didn't really notice how he felt, because I really couldn't give a monkey's, because I was so self-absorbed and self-interested that, you know, I didn't really care. I was more about self-preservation, because here was yet another school and another loads of teachers and another, you know, and the street that we moved into wasn't very nice. We lived in the upstairs of you know, the houses can be upstairs and down, so you can have whole houses, can't you, there? And we lived on a corner. It wasn't really a proper street. It was a main road. And, yeah, there wasn't a community like there was back then. So I used to spend all my time getting the bus and going and hang around with my auntie and my grandmother. My grandmother wasn't very well at the time. She was quite ill. My grandmother Helena, my dad's mum, and yeah, I really had enough by then. I mean, this story that I'm telling you, the whole thing was a year really, about 15 months at most. So all those moves happened within about 15 months. So it was just too much for a 12-year-old, and.
Especially 12, you're preteen, going through a lot of changes. I can imagine. It must have been difficult. So when did you start realizing that things were changing a bit in like the political climate in Cyprus? Was there kind of feeling you got? What was that like?
Well, it started when I was at school in Famagusta. We had a really lovely teacher there in Gadovarosin, which is, you know, my second school. And she was widowed, and she was very young, which is quite unusual. But you've got to remember, a decade before, the English had been, you know, in Cyprus. So it was 72, but like Cyprus became independent, I think, in late 50s. So somebody had said to me that her husband had been in Olga and he'd been killed. But she couldn't have been more than about 35. She was quite young, a very attractive lady. And she had a son who was in the class. And she would teach us patriotic songs, and she would teach us patriotic poems, and all about the 1st of April, which is, you know, the start of Olga. And, you know, you could tell she was very political. And one day, the police turned up at the classroom door, and she had to go with them, and we had a relief teacher. So I kind of got the impression there was a lot of politics even going on within schools. And one of my uncles, they live up in the mountains, which is my mother's village. Remember, we went to stay there one weekend, and my cousin and I found guns under the bed. I mean, guns, I'd never seen a gun in my life. And I was going, Aggie, why are the guns under your dad's bed? And he was going, it's my dad's hunting guns. I said, does he really need about 15, you know, to shoot a few bunnies? And yeah, and then one day the military turned up and started searching the house. So there were kind of undercurrents, which I thought, God, you wouldn't get this in London. You wouldn't get this in Wembley. You know, this would not happen back in London. There wouldn't be guns under people's beds. This country's just too much, you know. So there were little things like that. And then nothing until the day that school had finished. I was bored at home. I decided to go up to my grandmother's, and my dad's shop was opposite my grandmother's house. And we just saw tanks rolling down the street, just shooting randomly at houses. Must have been about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And You know, it's really weird because you'd think that would alert me to something going wrong, but that country was so strange that I think my perception of normality had completely got out the window. I thought, oh, now they're just shooting at each other. That's what happens out here. And I just got on the bus, and the bus, like it was in my story, the bus driver was like, where are you going? And I was going, I'm going to my dad's house, my yaya's house. And he thought that's where I lived. So he said, Ade, come on, get in and I'll take you there. And then when I got there, all my uncles were hovered around this little radio and this music was playing, you know, this ethnic music, like, you know, I Gibros Mas, Pote, then Thas, you know, and Sklavothi. And I'm like, what is going on, you know? And they were going, what's the moron doing here? And I'm like, don't call me a moron, I'm nearly 12, you know, kind of thing. And yeah, that's when it all kicked off, you know.